What is up, everybody, and welcome into the Blogger Bowl Week 2 recap. I am Dan Weiner in Florida. Phil, we were able to find a window to get Phil in with us on back from his trip out east to watch his Holy Cross Crusaders put up a heck of a fight and come up just short against Boston College, but a great effort from them. Matt will be here soon. I don't know. He's had a meeting, and then he said he'd pop in at some point in the next couple of minutes. So Matt will be here soon, but Phil, how you doing today, my friend?
Obviously down in the dumps. You never want to have a good effort type game or a moral victory when it comes to Holy Cross versus Boston College. But the one takeaway from that game is obviously Holy Cross is a legitimate top 5 FCS school, and Boston College is not in great shape. When the Boston College players as well as fans are like talking some serious trash down up by 3 points against an FCS opponent, you're in trouble. Also, when there's a rain delay and then you come back and there's 11 Boston College fans in the stand, not great signs for Jeff Hafley, and I'm surprised they didn't try to hire Bob Chesney at halftime.
Well, I said that was a possibility. Was it the BC fans or was it the Holy Cross fans that were running across the field during the weather delay?
That was the Holy Cross fans.
Okay,
I think the Holy Cross fans ran across and mooned the BC fans, which was just incredible. Like, it's tough to bounce back from that if you're a BC faithful.
So, I was in New York this week, and I was at the Texas Alumni Watch Party at Stout. Shout out to the Texas X's alumni chapter at Stout Grand Central for a hell of an event this weekend. So I didn't get to see as much football as I wanted to, but that was one of the things that kept popping up on Twitter because there were weather delays all over the country. That was kind of one of the overarching themes this weekend. Like, basically from Atlanta north to Boston, there were weather delays across college football on Saturday. So it kind of made things a little wacky. But I kept seeing the videos of students just because, like, the security was like, we're out. We're done. We're not going to get struck by lightning here. So they pieced out. You see Holy Cross fans running across the field, like doing full sprints across the field at Chestnut Hill, because why not? I mean, this is a dumb question. How often do they play Boston College?
So they played them in 2019. So it's not an every year thing. It's just kind of every blue moon. So the last time they played was in the 80s, and then they revived it when Holy Cross went full scholarship and got approved to play FBS schools. So I'm assuming it'll probably be like every 3 to 5 years. I think because they had such a great turnout this year as well.
Gotcha. My history lesson, which I didn't do last week, was about the Holy Cross Boston College and a really like tragic moment in the history of that rivalry from the 1940s. But the point being, like, this was a rivalry that was very intense for a long time. And then obviously a lot of things happened after World War II that changed it. But Phil, I'm not even being a homer when I tell you the big story of the week in college football: Texas is back. Texas 34, Alabama 24, and let me set the stage for you here. With 14 seconds left in the third quarter, Jalen Milroe uncorked a perfect throw to Jermaine Burton in the end zone for a 49-yard touchdown pass. Milroe had been largely bad throwing the ball to that point, but suddenly Alabama had a 16-13 lead. Earlier in the game, Xavier Worthy dropped a touchdown pass. Bert Auburn missed a 42-yard field goal. And suddenly, those 7 points were suddenly looming large. It felt like it happened so many times in Steve Sarkisian's tenure at Texas that missed opportunities were going to be killer for the Longhorns. And what happened next may have changed the trajectory of the program. How does Texas respond to Alabama taking the lead in that situation? 3 plays, 75 yards, and just over a minute, when Quinn Ewers finds A.D. Mitchell for a touchdown, Texas has the lead. Next drive, Milroe throws an interception. Jaron Thompson returns it inside the 5. First play of the ensuing Texas drive, Jonathan Brooks runs it in for a touchdown, and suddenly, in less than 90 seconds, Texas is back up by 11.
You could have just stopped at Texas is back.
Sorry, Matt?
I said you could have just stopped at Texas is back.
True.
You didn't have to say up in 90 seconds. Just Texas is back.
Texas is back. Alabama, they're not going to quit. They don't quit. They get another touchdown pass from Milroe. It's a 3-point game again. And then Ewers finds Jordan Whittington for a big gain and then uncorks a perfect pass to Mitchell, who beat his man deep for a touchdown. Texas is up 10. Alabama gets the ball back. Texas forces a 3-and-out. They get a sack at the end of the play. And then Texas gets the ball back with 7.5 minutes left and doesn't give it back. They just run the ball at Alabama 9 straight times. They convert 2 third downs. They get a 4th and short. Alabama jumps offside, and Texas is able to ice the game and win it. In our preview show last week, I said it. The Santana Moss quote, one of my favorite quotes of all time, big time players step up in big games. We had questioned whether or not Texas had that in them to do this. Last year was marked by almost beat Alabama, had a chance to beat TCU. In Steve Sarkisian's first season at Texas, they blew 3 second half double-digit leads in a row against Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. This was a program who really struggled to close out games, and it felt like it was getting away from them. And what ultimately happened at the end of that game is not only did the players make the big plays, but Steve Sarkisian did not get conservative. He kept his foot on the gas. It's kind of ironic. His whole thing has been all gas, no brakes. And that's what it was. Go to Dan Orlovsky's Twitter page and see the breakdown he did of the A.D. Mitchell touchdown, the second one, the long pass, and see what Steve Sarkisian did to scheme him wide open. It was phenomenal. I talked about Quinn Ewers' inability to throw the deep ball through most of his career after the Alabama game last year. Here's this. He was 3 for 5 on passes 20 yards down the field against Alabama. That means for his career, he's 7 for 12 on those passes against Alabama and Oklahoma and 5 for 43 against everyone else. So, I mean, we'll see what's going to happen the rest of the year, but Texas answered the bell every time Alabama fought back in that game, and that was the most impressive thing. Now they're going to have to keep it going. They bought themselves a 1-game buffer. They can lose 1 game this season and still make the playoffs. And to go from me being like skeptical they can make the playoffs to being like, oh, now they can, I think they showed they have the possibility of being a playoff team this year. The pressure is always on Texas to win. It's just going to ramp up. The target just got bigger on their backs, but they seem more capable of handling that. Now, there's one other thing that I want to talk about in a macro sense, and it kind of ties these two teams together, these two programs together. Where Tom Herman went wrong at Texas, well, he went wrong in a lot of ways, but it was really 2 big things. 1, he assembled a really bad coaching staff to start, and 2, his roster construction was weird. He was like a 13-year-old playing NCAA football dynasty mode. It was like, I'm just going to recruit a ton of skill position players, and linemen, yeah, we'll be touch and go. And it didn't work. So when Sark took over, he hired people he was familiar with, but these are people from Alabama. He brings in Kyle Flood, the offensive line coach from Alabama, and they realized very quickly the offensive line wasn't good enough. They create what they call the Pancake Factory, which was an NIL collective, and it ends up signing one of the best offensive line classes in the history of college football. That's objectivity. That's like just from a pure numbers perspective. They only have 1 senior on their offensive line, guys. It is a young group that is getting better and better and better each and every week. The other great hire he made was Bo Davis, who was the defensive line coach from Alabama, who is an intense guy, wants his defensive lines to be physical. To Tom Herman's credit, he did leave a good amount of defensive line talent, and Bo Davis has turned that group into a just ferocious unit. Phil and I were talking off air. Texas was the more physical team in this game. They just were. Alabama had 1 tackle for loss in the passing game and 0 sacks. Texas had 9 total tackles for loss, 5 sacks, and held Jace McClellan and Roydell Williams to 18 carries and 57 yards. Milroe got his on the ground, but Texas shut down the traditional run game, and Milroe couldn't hit the intermediate stuff. And it just kind of feels like up front, these are 2 programs that are headed in different directions. Texas is ascending. Alabama is descending, which I've talked about for a long time on this show. I talked about it last year. And Texas was the more physical team. And when it came down to it, they landed more power punches and knocked Alabama out at home. Saban's first non-conference home loss since the hilarious Louisiana Monroe loss his first year at Alabama. His first double-digit home loss since like 2002 when he was at LSU. This was impressive across the board for the Longhorns. I'm sorry I've been long-winded, but I don't think you can talk about
That's okay.
and be less. I don't think you could be any more impressed by what Texas did on Saturday night.
Yeah, and I've a couple things to add. The first, when it comes to Alabama, it's clear that they struck out in the transfer portal from a quarterback standpoint. And I don't understand the thought process of bringing in Buckner, knowing he's essentially.
Did they just go all in on Drake May, and then when that didn't happen, just like, oh well, we're not gonna, or maybe were they too late at that point? Because you're completely right. That's what happened. They struck out and circled back to Tyler Buckner.
Yeah, circle back to Tyler Buckner, who's probably slightly more accurate than Jalen Milroe, but not as high upside athletically. So it's just sort of you kind of gain something but lose another, and he's not accurate from the intermediate routes too. And when Dan and I were talking earlier in the show, or before the show aired, is Alabama cannot survive. They can be a 10-win team, but they can't be a national championship contending team without a quarterback who can hit the intermediate routes, because Jalen Milroe will hit some deep shots. They have some guys who will be running wide open. Against bad teams, that will be fine. But against the top tier teams who have elite secondaries, who they're going to force to hit the intermediate routes, if he can't do that, they're not going to win. And we saw that on full display. Second point, it was awesome seeing the transition of Quinn Ewers throughout the years. It was sort of like the reverse Animorphs type thing, where he went from being an animal with almost looked like a skunk down to a regular human. And Dan, I gotta say, and Matt, keep me honest here. Quinn Ewers entering handsome territory.
We were first on this when we said we liked the mullet being cut. Everybody else was like, no, why'd you cut the mullet? You're Texas. That was a good move.
They thought it was going to be a Samson situation where he loses his power, but genuinely gotten more handsome, cleaned up, and he's a dog.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put a pin in that for a second. Matt, what were your thoughts on the game?
I will be. I watched this from my phone at a wedding, so didn't have the closest eyes on it. But from what I kind of did see and kind of go back and watch a little bit, Quinn Ewers is absolutely that dude and might be the best quarterback in the country. And I'm including Caleb Williams in that. I'm including Sam Hartman in that. Yes, I believe Sam Hartman belongs to that conversation because I have to. But what you and what we've all been kind of saying about Alabama really since this game last year is they don't have the dudes that they used to have. They still have some very good football players because they're Alabama, because they're still top recruiting classes. I don't know if it's a development issue. I don't know if it's a lack of hitting the transfer portal issue. I don't know if it's recruiting classes coming up a little bit emptier than they'd hoped. Obviously, I think NIL is balancing out things a little bit, but they just don't have the dudes. And Texas does have the dudes. And like you've said, big boy football in the SEC or in college football with Ohio State, SEC, or I guess what Ohio State used to be, the top dogs always are best in the trenches. That's where you win and lose football games. Shadur Sanders pretty much said it himself. Game speed's pretty much the same with the skill players. The change from here to FCS, it's how fast those defensive linemen get on you. That's what makes all the difference in the world. Obviously, you need to have skill players, but all the great teams have those. You need to be built in the trenches, and Texas is undoubtedly built in both trenches.
Yeah, and then the physicality is the big thing. The offensive line at Alabama has declined. I think as far as the quarterback portal thing is concerned, I don't necessarily think it was so much that they really think that Buckner is a guy they want to count on. It was more they struck out on Drake May and they wanted to bring in a guy who was familiar with Tommy Rees in case they needed him to play. If Ty Simpson just simply cannot go, if he simply is just not good enough, they wanted a guy that they could bring in the portal to potentially ignite something. And at least with Buckner, there's no learning curve because he knows Tommy Rees's offense. That was a theory that I heard floated out this offseason. Alabama, look, I mean, it's hard. We talked about the decline of quarterback play at Clemson. It's just hard to go from Jalen Hurts to Tua Tagovailoa. Jalen Hurts was the NFL MVP last year until he got hurt. Tua Tagovailoa, if he stays healthy, has a very good chance of being the NFL MVP this year. Mac Jones had an incredible season. I don't think Mac Jones is great at the NFL level, but led one of the best offenses in the history of college football at Alabama. It's just impossible to keep that going regardless of who you are. They don't have that guy. And Phil and I, another thing we were talking about before you joined, Matt, at least off air, was Jalen Milroe, he can throw a hell of a deep ball and he can run. That's going to be good enough for Alabama to probably win the West, particularly because LSU's defense doesn't seem that good. But by the time they play Georgia in Atlanta in December and Georgia's firing on all cylinders, if he can improve in the intermediate stuff that he just really struggled with against Texas, they're going to be DOA and they'll be end up in the Sugar Bowl. Like they'll be 10-2, 9-3, end up in the Sugar Bowl, or 10-3. If they end up in 10-3, it's a really interesting territory for Nick Saban, like where he is, because Alabama natives get restless very quickly there, even with legendary coaches. So it'll be interesting to see there.
They need to. I'm not sure if they need to kind of reinvent themselves, what they do in terms of recruiting, in terms of the portal, just because I don't know, reinvent's the right word, but Nick Saban used to be able to roll out of bed and just recruit a top 3 recruiting class without making a phone call. Like now with how NIL is, with how recruiting is, and everybody being kind of on the same playing field, they might have to take a different approach, because calling Drake May and just telling him you're Alabama doesn't get him to come to Alabama like it might have 5-10 years ago. Calling, I don't know, Nico whatever from Tennessee, whose name I can't pronounce, and telling him you're Alabama doesn't necessarily just work anymore. It works on some kids, but it's not working on everybody anymore. So they're going to have to come up with a little bit of a different approach. Obviously, they won't be short on NIL money because they're Alabama and they can spend whatever the hell they want. But there's going to need to be a little bit of creativity and, I guess, change in that recruiting process.
It'll be interesting to see where they go from here at quarterback. Do they make a change? Do they give other guys some shots? Because I think the sort of the ceiling with Milroe. I don't think he's going to fix his accuracy midseason. So curious if they just kind of put their head down and say, this is who we are, or give other people some shots. I mean, the schedule will warrant them the opportunity to do so. I don't think it's anything. I don't think Milroe's performance was like bench him right now, right? Because he made some unbelievable throws and showed that there is something there. It's almost like he's giving them enough to keep them going. I'm just curious how far they'll take it.
I mean, to be fair, this was career start number 3 for him. So I'm not like gonna just go ahead and say this guy can't do it, but yeah, it seems like, and like I said, I think he's got enough juice to get them to where they need to go, which is the SEC title game. I just don't know if they can do it without losing another game, and I don't think they can beat Georgia if he doesn't improve as we go on. I talked a lot in that last segment, so for the next game, I'm going to largely lay out to you guys and let you guys talk about it. Notre Dame 45, NC State 24. I did not see any of this game. It had the weather delay. I know that Matt didn't. I know Phil was able to watch a lot more of it than he thought he was going to because of the weather delay that we talked about. Matt, when we're done, go back and watch just the beginning of the show to listen to us talk about the Holy Cross Boston College rain delay.
I'm sorry, Phil. That was tough.
But just kind of perusing box score, it seems like a pretty comprehensive win for Notre Dame. I do want to pull the pin now back on the conversation of hair and ask the question, is Sam Hartman too handsome?
Yes.
Should he cut his hair,
I think he might be,
beard or something? Because Quinn Ewers, like, he's better with the close crop, but he's still.
I'm not sure he could do anything to his hair that would make him less handsome. That's the thing. I just think he's locked into said level of handsome.
Like if he went straight straight crop, buzz it down.
No, if you buzz it, you lose the power. You can't.
I don't know that
he's still hot.
I don't know. I don't
say handsome. Phil can say hot.
I don't know that describing your quarterback as smoldering is something that's good for a program. But in all seriousness, Notre Dame 45-24. Matt, you saw the most of this. We're the most locked in. Big game next week for the Fighting Irish. And at least so far, this was their biggest test thus far, and it seemed like it went pretty well.
You know, I talked about this on Thursday's show, how I thought this game was going to kind of go somewhat this way. Like NC State was going to put up a tough fight, but Notre Dame was going to kind of find a way to eke out, a 31-17 type win late, because that is the type of win I'm accustomed to Notre Dame having in these situations where they come into a sleepy start against a frisky, on a frisky ACC road game, maybe in an early start. And they, NC State started with all the momentum. They got after Sam Hartman. They were shutting down the run. They were bringing pressure. Like Notre Dame looked flustered. And historically, that's the type of game that Notre Dame either loses or it needs a Deshaun Kaiser to Will Fuller touchdown pass with time expiring at Virginia to win 31-28, something like that. They got the lightning break, but Notre Dame played their B- game offensively and still figured out a way to punch NC State in the mouth and run away with this one. Like Sam Hartman was not very good early on. He settled in, did some things well, but took what defenses give him. The offensive game plan I thought was perfect and made adjustments. And they were able to rally, shake off that awful start in a road environment that was really hostile and just kind of dominate offensively. And then defensively, that was as much speed as I've seen a Notre Dame defense play with in a long time, and they have depth all over the field. The pass rush just gets after people fast, and there's not the Romeo Okwara type name or Jalen Smith type name rushing on the edge, but man, like they have depth at the defensive line position that I haven't seen them have in years. So I thought offensively was a nice effort, and I thought they rallied well and recovered from a bad start. But I left this game being incredibly impressed with their defense and how fast and aggressive and physical they played, because that's something I haven't seen from a Notre Dame defensive unit since maybe the year they lost to Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl, where Jalen Smith got hurt, where that team was really, really good, but had a bunch of injuries and couldn't overcome. Like, this defense is deep and they're good at every position.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is you have like elite cornerback play. So they have a surefire first round draft pick in Benjamin Morrison, who's a true sophomore right now. And then they have a guy who's going to get drafted in Cam Hart at the other side. And so that is something where Notre Dame has, at least in my lifetime, has never had two.
They've never had two. They've sometimes had one really good one, but they've never had a second.
Yeah, so when Julian Love was there, he was, an elite level corner. But again, they've never had two, and then pair that with safeties who are now actually making plays. So obviously we had Kyle Hamilton in the past, but they haven't had a rotation of safeties. So now I have three different safeties who've had interceptions. They had, 3 picks in this game, all after the lightning delay, which is huge. The one thing that stood out to me too is that their offense did come out a bit slow. The running game was getting stifled a little bit. NC State has a great run defense. They have great cornerbacks. And the one thing which worried me going into this game is how are our wide receivers going to handle a big jump in cornerback play? And to begin, they didn't really answer the bell. But the one thing which is awesome is that Notre Dame hasn't utilized the tight ends this season up until this point, really. And so then they shifted. They had a couple great unbalanced line looks. And so Jared Parker is doing some interesting things to then pivot and get his tight ends the ball. And so we saw Holden Stays end up with, 4 catches for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns and looked like, very athletic. So I think this is going to be a really interesting team of a really interesting exercise, especially going into Ohio State, going into USC, going into Clemson, of where they try to take Notre Dame's offense away. Because I think that the first and foremost idea is take away the run game because they have great staple of running backs. Try to take away their wide receivers because they're not that great. And so it's going to come down to can Sam Hartman hit those safety or hit those tight ends and running backs to then loosen up things for the secondary. So I think this year an interesting stat too is they have 11 different people who've caught a touchdown pass, who've caught touchdown passes.
That's kind of insane.
They're really spreading the ball around. So they don't have any dominant forces from a pass catching standpoint, but they do have a lot of top middle-ish tier talent, right? Where no one's who's going to blow the top off. So that really lends itself to if Sam Hartman can stay dialed in, I think this team has a, playoff potential, and that's with one loss. I don't think they run the table. I think they're going to stumble at some point, but they've shown that this is a team with elite secondary, elite quarterback play, a great stable of running backs, great tight ends, and then solid receivers. So the recipe is there. So again, this is fun to watch right now.
It was also nice to see from an offensive coordinator standpoint, and I'm not to kick Tommy Rees while he's down or anoint Jared Parker too early, but in years past, like if you look at the Stanford game that they lost last year or whatever, like Tommy Rees would have taken what wasn't working and stubbornly kind of just kept trying to do it until it did. And for a lot of the time that would end up working because Notre Dame was just kind of better and more talented than most of the opponents on their schedule last year. Jared Parker saw it wasn't working and tried to do some things off that, set up some other looks, like Phil said, getting the tight ends involved, which they hadn't really done all year. So it was just nice to see from an offensive play calling standpoint. All right, this isn't working. We're going to play the chess match. We're going to try this move. They're going to counter, see how they work with that. And I thought they won the battle there too.
So the last thing I will say about this, I was just kind of trying to look through some stats. Texas, it would be a very Texas thing to lose to random Big 12 teams. Would it be the most Notre Dame thing imaginable if they were to beat Ohio State next weekend at home and then turn around and lose the game to Duke the following week? Because suddenly that game is looming very, very that's a sneaky, not even so sneaky anymore. That's a tough
it's not
game
sneaky.
To have to
I'm
play.
actually happy that Duke has gotten better or is getting a little bit more attention because it can still be a game that sneaks up on them. But with how well Duke is playing, that's a game they can't afford to overlook anymore because Duke's going to have that number 17 next to their name or whatever the hell it is when they play. So it's one that they luckily aren't going to be able to, look past and just say, oh, it's Duke. But yes, that is, if they are fortunate enough to come away with a win at home against Ohio State, or if they lose, either way, that's a spot that's like, we need to get right back up for this one, because this is not the game we might have thought it was.
I'll say this behind the scenes, at least what our sources have been kind of telling our sites is that they've actually had that Duke game circled as, since before the season, potentially and this is going to sound crazy, but this is what we've heard from early on in the year, that Notre Dame was more concerned about Duke going into this season than Clemson based on what they had returning. And that, it sounds crazy, but in terms of their preparation, what they're really anticipating, they've really had that game circled as this is going to be a massive challenge for us. And Elko's going to throw everything he has at us. He's a great coach. They're going to be disciplined. Did I agree with that? No. Do I agree with that now? Not really. But I don't think that'll be a game that Notre Dame will overlook.
I don't think it'll be overlooked. I don't think they're going to overlook.
It's a tough game. It's just a hard game.
It's still tough to, like, the emotion of that Ohio State game is going to be a lot to get back for the next week.
Agreed.
Two other games that we talked about last week. Miami 48, Texas A&M 33. Again, a game where you kind of talk both sides. We'll talk winners first. From the Miami side of things, they made some really dumb mistakes early and were getting beat up physically, but really withstood the early wobbles to fight back, and that was very impressive. Again, we talk about maturity with teams. Florida State against LSU, Texas late against Alabama. Miami really showed that in this game. More importantly, keeping with the theme of the week, is the U back? I'm skeptical. However, Tyler Van Dyke is back. We joked about the hype last year and how it got destroyed, but he was hurt and things around the program kind of sucked. So it's good to see him ball out. Can they beat Florida State and contend for the ACC? Yeah, I'm a little skeptical because of the other side of the ball. They got the turnovers when they needed them to, but they generated no tackles for loss or sacks on 53 dropbacks. And to make matters worse, Cameron Kitchens, who's their All-American safety and also had an interception in this game, carted off after a scary hit. He's vital to them. As for the other side, let me set the stage once again, like I did during the Texas game. At one point, A&M down 21-17. They have a 4th and 1 at the Miami 6. They false start and kick a field goal. Ensuing kickoff, Miami takes it to the house. It's 28-20. The next drive, Connor Wigman throws an interception that led to a field goal. And then the next time they had a chance to take the lead, they fumble. And the Miami scores, and that's basically it. The A&M talent is apparent every time they take the field, but they cannot get out of their own way with the mental mistakes time and time again. Wigman threw a couple of picks. The receiver fell down on the first one. Otherwise, I thought he played well. It's just not a serious program. It's not a program run by adults. Like I said, the talent said the defense is not good, and that's a problem. Like, they have a DJ Durkin problem at Texas A&M. Like, we talked about the Petrino.
They've recruited well defensively.
Yeah. We talked about the Petrino Jimbo relationship kind of being a thing to keep an eye on. The defense is bad. Like, the offense has looked pretty good aside from the turnovers and just like dumb mistakes. Margins are way too thin for this team though right now. And if they can't stop making dumb mistakes, if they can't grow up from the top down, they're going to kind of be a team that just continues to underachieve.
Yeah, they went, for me, they went 5-7 last year. They come in this season ranked. And then this happens. It's like,
it's the same thing we talked about last year.
It's like, who could have seen this coming? This is with the setup that they have now, with the coaching staff that they have right now. This is an 8-4 team. And so it's just, that's 8-4 at best. And that's nothing that I saw this weekend will change that. This wasn't like a wildly, unbelievably good Miami team. Texas A&M is going to face much worse this year. And so I just see them kind of sputtering and making an average bowl game. And that's that. And I just quit giving them so much airtime, everybody. Not us.
Well, Jimbo told us that Miami defenders were clapping, trying to mix up the snap time. So that's why they lost. That's why their defense gave up 48 points.
Just
that's
take
why
ownership of something for once in your fucking life.
Dan, he won a national championship, all right? He's got one of these.
Yeah.
But no, I did leave this game still impressed with Connor Wegman. Like, I do think he's still a pretty good quarterback. I don't think really any of this was on him. No. He got tasked with trying to put up 50 points because they just didn't have a running game. And he came pretty darn close and made a mistake or two trying to force the ball down the field. Like, that's going to happen when you're asked to throw the ball 53 times a game. But just everywhere else, it's just a lack of getting the most out of the insane talent you recruited. And I know that class is sophomores now, which is still, younger, but this is their second year in a program now where a lot of them got serious playing time last year. Like, they're there needs to be some sign of improvement, and we're just not seeing any of that improvement. Like, they're just staying the same. It's same story, different chapter, week after week. And I apologize that I somewhat bought in the A&M hype last week. It wasn't really buying into the A&M hype. It was more fading the Miami hype in this hype on hype matchup. So I guess I partially blame myself, not fully, because I wasn't fully buying into A&M. I was more fading Miami, but still, I don't know where you kind of go from here. They do have a DJ Durkin problem. Jimbo's there for a long time because they're not going to pay him that much money to go away. It's just they're what the White Sox used to be when Rick Hahn said they're mired in mediocrity. Like, that's kind of what they are, right? And all serious, and not just making a White Sox joke. Like, they're fine. They're going to beat some teams they probably shouldn't. They're going to lose some games they probably shouldn't, and they're going to be slightly above average.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
no doubt about it. The last of the games that we talked about last week: Colorado 36, Nebraska 14. Guys, I'm not talking about Colorado. Talked about them last week. I was wrong about them. We learned nothing about them from the Nebraska game that we didn't already know. In fact, I don't even care about the final score. Like, Nebraska did show some of the weakness in the Colorado offensive line in the first half. They were able to get to Shedeur Sanders. The problem is that Matt Rule completely botched the offensive rebuild in year one by hitching his wagon to Jeff Sims. I mentioned it when we first talked about Nebraska this season. He's only gone from college football for a short period of time, but the sport changed a lot in that time period. There will be some leeway, but going 2-10 or 1-11 like he did in his first year at Temple and Baylor won't fly. I'm not saying where that's Nebraska is headed, but because of the transfer portal, even if you don't go full Dion, you can bring in enough players to move things in the right direction quickly. It was a disaster against Colorado, and now the clock has started accelerating. Sims is hurt. He ran off Casey Thompson because he was so convinced Sims was the guy. They have no quality depth behind him. He also hired Marcus Satterfield, who is not well liked or well thought of at South Carolina to run the offense. Basically, Marcus Satterfield's playbook is so complex they had to simplify it so that they could play well at the end of the season, and it seems like he's just gone back to doing what he did. That said, aside from a visit to Michigan, aside from a visit from Michigan on September 30th, the schedule is pretty soft, so there's a chance he can string together wins because the defense, again, showed some promise, but it's going to have to be some low-scoring slugfest because he did a poor job building an offense in year one. So as you can tell, I'm reading my notes that I wrote about this game, and then I heard a quote from his press conference either yesterday or this weekend that has completely soured me on Matt Rule when he said, and I quote, "This is kind of what you get when you hire me. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's not going to be overnight. It's going to be built to last. It's going to be built on rock." Dude, I'm sorry. I get what you're going for, but the optics of that quote, when you just got beat 36-14 by a team that won one game last year, are horrendous.
Yeah, like, it looks like he's like just taking another weird shot at Dion, which I don't really understand. Like, you can build your program on solid recruiting classes while also retool it and get them better, which will also improve your recruiting classes. Because if Colorado didn't hit the transfer portal and they just had Dion and they just brought over Shedeur and they went 2-10 or whatever the hell it might be this year, Dion would have a tougher time recruiting. He'd still get some guys, but he'd have a tougher time recruiting. Now that Colorado looks like they have a chance to go 8-4, 9-3, something like that, and he's got this exciting offense, whatever, it's going to make recruiting a whole lot easier because he has that selling point. Matt Rule is going to have a tough time selling that point to recruits that, yeah, come on here. We just went 2-11 last year at a big program like Nebraska with the pool he's going to want to play in terms of grabbing elite recruits. You can have your cake and eat it too now in college football. You can build through the transfer portal, at least partially better than he did, and build your program on foundation of rock, like he wanted to say. So just a very strange quote for him to when he basically just could have said, yeah, I struck out on Jeff Sims, hand up, that's on me. Obviously you can't say that in a press conference, but
just my only
Casey Thompson was better than Jeff Sims.
Yeah. Agreed. And at least don't try to run him out of the program and, put it behind a guy who's been who he is through his entire career, right? And it's
strange.
It's get one of those guys where it's like you think it's just suddenly going to click. And I think that's the allure of freakishly athletic guys with big arms, that it's just suddenly going to click because, I can fix them. But the one thing which is going to be just, really exciting is that, then not next week, but the following 2 weeks, we got Colorado against Oregon and Colorado against USC. And those games, Colorado USC might be 100-100.
There is not a total I will take the under in that game. I will, whatever the over is, it could be 99.5. I'm taking the over that's on my card.
Yeah, but it's just been exciting to watch Colorado. I'll say that. People are watching, people are tuning in, and it's good for college football, despite what you might think about Dion. It's exciting, and people are talking about it, and this experiment is crazy, and I'm excited to see how it unfolds throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, I've been wildly impressed with Shedeur Sanders. Like, it's not just playing bad TCU defense. Now, they played a pretty solid defense, and he still looks calm, cool, collected, knows where to go with the football. Like, he never really looks like he's panicking. He takes care of the football. So I was wrong about what I thought his adjustment period, what it might be to FBS from FCS. He's been fantastic.
An analog, my last point on this before we move on to the games for this week that I'm interested in. The analog here that I think is a fair comparison is Washington. Granted, Chris Peterson did a really good, sneaky good job of loading that program with good players. Like, they continue to turn out NFL players. Just Jimmy Lake was way in over his head. And in his last season, they go 4-8. They bring in Kalen DeBoer, who goes and handpicks his transfer quarterback, Michael Penix Jr., who he brought with him or who he coached at Indiana. And they go from 4-8 to 10-2. Nebraska wasn't going to go 10-2 this year. There's no denying that. But you can make a big jump really quickly if you play things right. And to just sit here and be like, well, you're going to get a guy who's not going to coach very well early on in this. Just know me. Anyway, so Matt, I told Phil as we turn the calendar, turn the page to week 3. Week 3 does not have the marquee LSU, Florida State, Texas, Alabama, or next week, Ohio State, Notre Dame. We have the actual Pac-12 championship game next week with Oregon State and Washington State. FSU Clemson is next week. There are some just bangers next week. There isn't that on the schedule, but I actually have 18 games written down. Most of these are either, hey, this is a team we should all be curious about playing, the first team with a pulse they play all season, or just a collection of games, and some of them are just a collection of games that could get wacky. So I'll just go through to give out some spreads, some things, and if you have any thoughts on any of these games, go ahead and shout them out. The first one is actually a game I don't really care about, but I do like to be transparent and give out my bets that I make early in the week on this show. Army is at UTSA. I took Army in 9.5. UTSA is not very good. They have regressed tremendously. Frank Harris is hurt.
Sad.
They are in the 100s in both success rate and EPA per play. They're just really, really struggling on offense. They probably shouldn't be favored by 9.5 points against just about anybody in college football. So I'll take Army there. Games, whatever. Florida State is at Boston College. Florida State's a 26.5 point favorite. I only put this on the list because you just want to monitor the weather there. Hurricane Lee is barreling down on New England. It looks like it's going to miss us in Connecticut, but Boston is north and east of us, and they could be in the path of the storm. They could have winds up to 40, 50 miles per hour, or it could just keep going east, or it could just keep going east and miss altogether. So the spread, or the total tick down there to 49.5. Keep your eye on the weather there. Also, Jordan Travis stats in that game likely to not be spectacular if the wind is terrible. LSU minus 9.5 points at Mississippi State. This is one of the games that could just be wacky because it's LSU and it's Mississippi State, and wacky things happen with those teams.
I'm interested in that one. LSU ran over Grambling last week. Obviously, Mississippi State, I don't want to say struggled with Arizona, but eked by Arizona in overtime. But I'm kind of high on Arizona's offense, at least this year. So they won a tough game at home. Interested to see that one, and Brian Kelly's team back on the road for another, very real test.
Klanga. Kansas State hits the road to take on Missouri. Kansas State is a 4.5 point favorite there. Just have talked about Kansas State as being a team that really does have a chance to repeat in the Big 12. Our first chance to kind of get to see them face some even-ish talent level there. Hey guys, the Georgia Bulldogs play a team with an actual pulse, kind of. They host South Carolina. Georgia's a 27.5 point favorite. Would be surprised if they get pushed there, but Georgia's kind of handled their business the first couple of weeks without being world beaters by any stretch.
That's what they did last year too.
They're going to just need to elevate their level here. I would not be surprised if they do in any stretch of the imagination, but SEC opener at home, just kind of our first real look at Georgia this year.
Yeah, just for that one, I'm excited to see Georgia play a team with a pulse with a quarterback who can go off at any point. Again,
Right.
it's a type of game where I think we'll be sitting maybe at like a tie game and like the start of it, like the midway through the second quarter. I just don't think South Carolina will have the horses to keep up. But it's one of those games where you just similar to Notre Dame this past week, and this is obviously I think actually probably pretty similar type of test in terms of like talent to talent, right? That level of gap between the two teams. So I'm really curious to see just what Georgia looks like against a middle of the road SEC team.
Yeah.
I didn't write down the spread on this, but San Diego State is at Oregon State. This is just going to be kind of a nice comparison game. UCLA whooped San Diego State 35-10. Dante Moore looked good. They ran the ball really well. So you can't really do like you can't really necessarily build like a model or a projection on a team, but we do have a Pac-12 team having played San Diego State last week. So we'll kind of get to kind of see where Oregon State is, and Oregon State's going to just remain one of the fascinating teams in college football. Minnesota at North Carolina, one of those just like weird, this is like a weird non-conference matchup that's intriguing. 7.5 is the spread. North Carolina favored. I don't think Minnesota's offense is going to be nearly good enough to contend in this game, but it's Drake May against one of the better defenses he's going to face. So I do think NFL people are going to be looking at this game to kind of see Drake May against what's usually been a very, very, very good Minnesota defense.
Yeah. Yeah. One, I don't know if you're going to bring up this game, Dan, but one that I just wanted to highlight real quick is I'm really interested, similar to, actually not too similar to Georgia, but just to Tennessee, right? Tennessee goes down.
I was going to get to that one.
Okay. Take it then.
Our balls.
That's going to be one of the games we talk about on the preview show because that game is infinitely fascinating to me. Real quick, we can go there. Tennessee at Florida. Florida's a 6.5. Florida's a 6.5. A 6.5 point underdog at home. Not to get into too much there, but Tennessee 2-14 in the divisional era at the Swamp. A fascinating game.
Yeah. Also coming off a game in which it was with 9 minutes left. It was a 10-point game against Austin Peay last week. So is Tennessee good? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think that's probably a look ahead spot.
Yeah, well, there was a player only meeting after that game because of how they played. I'm going to save a lot of the conversation for when we get to the preview show because that's a really, 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 that's one of the most interesting early season games that we've had so far. Kind of a draw a line in the sand kind of moment for Florida as well. I just put this on there. There's no line yet, but excuse me, Idaho at California. Idaho's a really good FCS team. This is kind of a sneaky good game, but I will bring up Idaho in a minute. Washington, they hit the road to take on a Michigan State program where things are very, very normal and functional.
Nothing going on there
right now. Washington's a 16-point favorite on the road. I don't want to get into how
I don't either.
So we're going to move on. Georgia Tech at Ole Miss. Georgia Tech's offense
Huskies.
actually has been kind of functional. 19.5 Ole Miss favorite. Just a gross cover from Lane Kiffin. Just another kind of interesting one there. BYU at Arkansas. Again, now BYU, remember, a Power 5 team. Arkansas, KJ Jefferson, don't really know what they are. So we'll kind of get to see if either one of those teams can be a roadblock in their respective conferences. Syracuse and Purdue. Let's not forget how ridiculous that game was last year. Syracuse has been doing Syracuse has been pretty good so far, kind of under the radar. Haven't played anybody. Purdue, who knows? And guys, the backyard brawl is this week. And when we talk about games that can get wacky, Pitt, West Virginia, cannot wait. Guys, West Virginia played Duquesne this week. Do you guys know where Duquesne is located?
I want to say Iowa, but that's Dubuque.
That is Dubuque.
New York.
Duquesne is located in Pittsburgh. So West Virginia basically played a backyard brawl scrimmage last week. And for some reason, I found that infinitely fascinating. Pitt, a 1.5 point favorite. That's a weird game. I should have taken this one off, but I left it up. FAU and Tom Herman, they hit the road to take on Clemson. Clemson's a 24.5 point favorite. And I was like, oh boy, is this one of those Tom Herman as an underdog spots? But because I was out of pocket this week, I didn't realize they lost 17-10 to Ohio. So
they're not good.
Probably not a good one there.
Not good.
Another game that is going to get has potential, I think, to be exceptionally wacky and weird. TCU at Houston. Remember, TCU could not stop Colorado. Houston just lost to Rice. Man, This game's going to be weird. I can't wait. Colorado State at Colorado. Big noon Saturday is just like they have moved to Boulder. College game day is going to be there. It's a 10 o'clock ESPN game. Colorado State stinks. Colorado, a 22.5 point favorite. And then the last one I put on the list is not a game that's really going to matter, but this kind of blows my mind. Kansas, our Jayhawks are hitting the road to take on Nevada. Remember I brought up Idaho? Idaho beat Nevada 33-6 this past weekend.
Nevada stinks.
That was not close. Kansas is a 28-point favorite, and I'm curious as to when the last time Kansas was a 4-touchdown favorite against an FBS.
Should we hammer the Hawks?
I don't
Laying
think it's
number?
I don't think that's to me laying 27.5 with Kansas is dicey.
Hell, they almost cover that against U of I.
Yeah, I mean, God.
Dan, have you Matt, there's one thing that I don't know if Dan is really taking into consideration, where his Longhorns could have a pretty tough letdown spot against Wyoming. And Matt, do you know who the Wyoming leading wide receiver is? Do you?
Who's that?
Former Holy Cross Crusader wide receiver Ayer Asante, who runs a sub 4.4. So just something to think about, Dan. Just something to think about.
Just keep it in the back of your brain.
So here's the thing, right? Like my broken brain is like, oh God, here we go. But I feel like everyone is kind of on the Wyoming, they beat Texas Tech. That game was in Laramie, not in Lubbock. This game's in Austin. So I've kind of come around on the idea that maybe people are kind of like leaning too much into it. I do think that first half total, first half spread are going to be interesting. It's a big number. I thought it was like 27.5, something like that. So it's a big number. I mean, if I was going to take a side, I'd probably take Wyoming just because of kind of the Texas letdown factor. Plus, conference opener is next week. That I think that Texas might take their foot. I mean, they're playing Baylor, so who knows? But like maybe take their foot off the gas a little bit. So I do think that like Wyoming is probably the side that you would play if you want to play a side in that game. But yeah, I mean, I'm not overlooking it by any stretch of the imagination. Texas played UTSA last year after Alabama. It was 17-17 at halftime, and then Texas blew them out in the second half and actually ended up covering 17.5 in that game. So like, I'd expect that maybe you'll see a little bit of an emotional letdown a little bit, but maybe that's also going to be overblown. Like the other possibility is that Texas is going to be confident coming in after what they did, and maybe it is just a different team. Like, I don't know what to expect. Again, because the number is so big, I would probably lean Wyoming if I was going to play a side there, but like, I don't really have a strong taste. I'll be honest, and I'll throw the floor to you to see what you guys have looked at. Aside from that Army number this morning, like there's just like a lot of really big favorites. And like, I'm trying to talk myself into some of these big underdogs, and I really can't. Like, from a betting perspective, there's not a lot on the card that I'm super into right now.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough slate. I think I like Washington, just given what's going on at Michigan State and how explosive Washington's offense has been so far this year. Like, I think they're a very good team. I think their offense is incredibly legit, and I don't really, with or without their head coach, I don't really buy into what Michigan State has done so far this year. I'm also trying to find a Duke Northwestern line because I don't think there could be a spread big enough. 18.5, give me Duke. Easy. Northwestern, I'm sorry, is not just, they're not good.
Yeah.
They're one of the worst teams in FP. I know they won last.
However, I do want to give credit. I do want to give a shout out to all of the sports books that made UTEP the favorite and offered Northwestern at money line at plus money.
It was a battle for a little while, and then Northwestern pulled away. I don't think Northwestern's going into Duke and doing anything. I'll lay the 18.5 there with the Dukies, though I don't think that's technically allowed because I live in the state of Illinois and I'm not allowed to bet on Illinois colleges because that's a thing for some reason. I
didn't realize that.
That is a thing. Yeah.
One spread that I'm monitoring, and I'm almost gonna fade my initial brain here. Is
love that. I love that move.
Right? So
I love fading myself.
I'm like, okay, Western Kentucky getting 28 points against Ohio State. Ohio State has looked average. They have a big game coming up with Notre Dame the next week. Western Kentucky's offense has always been pretty good. Their quarterback has thrown for over 600 yards this year. Ohio State has looked susceptible, which is why I'm going to fade that and probably take Ohio State because it's like leading up to it, you just have a feeling that with Ryan Day, with the quarterbacks, with the offense, they oftentimes kind of sputter early in the season and then they just start to figure it out. And I think my brain, especially as a Notre Dame fan, is like, maybe they're really vulnerable. Maybe they'll keep looking pedestrian, which leads me to believe that they're going to come out and win by like 45 this week.
Yeah, wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
Western Kentucky's not going to play. The thing is, like, Western Kentucky's not going to have a good enough defense, even though, like, The Ohio State quarterback situation is really interesting. Also, Austin Reed, I love him. He's geared towards being like awesome to watch and win games against lesser teams, but he's a little bit too cavalier with ball security. Like, he's the quarterback who last year when he came to Western Kentucky said he's going to make some throws that are going to make you clench your butthole. And it's like, you can't really do that against you can't really do that against elite teams.
No.
Like, you can't, like, it's just not conducive to like pulling off those kinds of upsets. So yeah, I gotta try to find something I like other than that army number, because I just like the Duke point's a good one. Duke's probably a good look if it's under 3 touchdowns.
Washington's minus 16. I mean, do you have the dead cat bounce game? What do you guys call it? What is it again?
He's not fired. He's still there. He's still lingering.
He's suspended.
No, he was originally fired. Now it's just suspended due to the ongoing investigation.
He wasn't originally fired. He was suspended.
Well, no. So the report was
that he was
fired. Brett McMurphy had him fired.
Everyone thinks that once the investigation is over, he will be fired. They're just trying to cover their own ass and suspend him with pay. The whole situation's a disaster. But also at the same time, like, is it something like, I know this is a kind of maybe like a fucked up thing to say, but like to the players, is it something they can kind of just move on? Like, what effect does this have on the players when at this point there's nothing they can do but go out and get ready to play a football game?
Yeah,
like, I guess I don't think not. Like, look, there's an argument to be made. There's a case to be made that if Mel Tucker was doing a good job at Michigan State, the school would be trying to defend him more here. But like, part of the problem that, like, regardless of this just horrendous situation, he hasn't been doing a good job there. So like, if Mel Tucker is not involved in the process, is that a downgrade for Michigan State, regardless of the circumstance that led him to not being part of the process? I guess that's kind of my point, is it's not like you're losing a coach who is gives you a clear coaching advantage over everybody else that you're coaching against, I guess.
It's also not a situation where at least I don't know, but the players aren't like the bad witch is dead, you know? It's like they're not. I don't know if that would be like a rallying cry for them. Like, thank God he's gone, because it seems like they're just like a kind of middle of the road to below average team, and that's kind of it. So it's not like things were on fire that the players were rebelling against him, and then it's obviously a unique situation. But the 16, I feel like Washington's going to come out and just, similar to last year, just destroy them from the start.
It's entirely possible. Like, they might. I don't know. It's just one of those weird situations, and I don't know if like the off-field stuff, if it matters a lot or doesn't matter at all. Like, that's just one of those where I'm just like, the situation's awful. I feel terrible for the players on that team that are stuck in the middle of just a coach who is a complete and utter scum. Because I'm not going to
fired in season. If he's fired in season, aren't they allowed to enter the transfer portal?
Yeah,
if he's fired in season, I think it's a 30-day window to enter the transfer portal, which that becomes a whole other like
trade deadline.
It's like basically like it's like it
might be part of the reason why Michigan State isn't firing him right now.
It's what the Angels did a couple weeks ago to save like $2 million when they waived like their whole team, like all the guys they traded for, like Giolito and all those other guys. They just, like,
hilarious.
They waived them, and it's like, hey, here, all of you playoff contenders, here are guys who are on waivers. Go sign them. That's basically what it's going to be. Yeah. Like, that's actually kind of like a game that's probably worth playing at some point, is like looking through the Michigan State roster and seeing who could help, like who on their roster can help someone, contending teams, and potentially also might, like, who were they connected to in recruiting before they went to Michigan State, like that kind of
putting together those pieces of the puzzle.
Exactly, like kind of preemptively looking at that. Yeah, we talked a hell of a lot of football, guys. I'm excited to just kind of have a bunch of games on and not really care about any of them in particular this weekend. I will say to anyone listening, this is a good week if you want to score boyfriend/husband points to
apple picking weekend.
It is a totally acceptable apple picking weekend. There's enough to dig into that's interesting, but it is a
Plus,
good.
All the better games aren't the better-ish games aren't really till later. I think too, like Florida, Tennessee's at night.
Get up, go do some apple picking.
Barn burner between Bowling Green and Michigan's at night.
Do you guys have any good corn mazes out there, or do you have to go like out to Iowa?
No, we got some.
Corn mazes. Pro tip though. don't lead with that there aren't good games. Just be like,
Yeah.
hey, you know what do you want to do this weekend? You know what?
Let's do some fall stuff this
We spent
weekend.
the last couple weeks really diving in and watching football, but you know what? We got the NFL on Sunday, Saturday. Your day.
It's
Let's
your
figure
day.
out what you want to do. And she'd be like, don't you want to
Smart
watch
man.
the games? Be like, you know what? I don't even need to bring my phone.
I'll
to
catch
stream
up with
the-
them later. It's fine.
We'll figure it out later. You know what? It's your
I'll
day.
check some scores.
Also, isn't like what's who are the Eagles playing on Thursday night? Are they playing the Vikings?
Vikings.
That's like a really good Thursday night game too. Like usually the Thursday night game sucks, but that's actually like a really good Thursday night game too. So like
Could be.
you can on paper like good offense,
Yeah.
like good offense for the Vikings. Eagles good team. Like as far
It's
as
not
Thursday
Bears
night,
Commanders.
as far as Thursday night games go, that's a good Thursday night game. So you can even get some points in that way. So like, hey, you can watch the Thursday night game and then be like, hey, let's go do some fall stuff on Saturday.
Yeah.
Take her to a nice lunch. Go sit outside somewhere if the weather's not like. Do it up.
Go to
It's a good
brunch.
weekend
Go to
for that.
brunch. Take cocktails at brunch. You know what? Say, hey, you know what? Hey, babe, you want to get bloodies today?
So that is
This is a great
relationship.
idea.
That is relationship advice from a guy who's been married for a while, and a relative newlywed, and a man who is currently in a long-term committed relationship. So we all have the experience to tell you guys. Treat your lady this weekend.
Right.
Treat her on Saturday. And if you want to sit around and watch ball all day, go for it. And have fun. And if nothing else, there'll be some wacky stuff. Bet some money, win some money, and we will be back probably on Thursday. We'll do a production meeting off the air real quick to discuss a time for when we will come back and pick like 4 of these games to preview, because God, I don't know which 4 we pick other than Florida State. It is not an ideal big week game week, but you never know. Those can be some of the best weekends. So that'll do it for us. For Florida Phil, for #Hartman, for Heisman, I am Texas is back. We will talk to you later this week.